Om Tyageshwaram Ramakrishna Saradam Matrurupinam Vivekanandam Acharyam Natva Vakshyami Shuddhaye Om Sahana Bhavato Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhitam Astuma Vidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. In our last class we discussed the result of knowledge of the self. If one realizes the self, what is the result? Is that result in tune with human ends, human goals? Is it in line with what we want in this life? In this life we want happiness, peace. What does Upanishad say about happiness and peace? Shall we get happiness and peace by realizing the self? Are the Upanishads meaningful in that sense? And answer was yes. Upanishad emphatically says that if you realize the self, you will have happiness and peace. But it adds one more adjective saying Shashvatam Sukham, Shashvati Shanti. You will get permanent, eternal happiness and eternal peace. So it's not that presently we don't have happiness or peace. We do get some peace, some moments of happiness, some moments of peace and all that. But those are transitory. Those do not last long. Now we are happy, next day we become miserable. That happiness goes away. That peace goes away. The reason being, our present, this worldly peace and happiness, they are dependent on our idea that I am this body, I am this mind, this body, mind, and the world, and the contact between the objects and the senses, certain conditions. Our present happiness and peace are dependent on all these. This body, mind, sense, object, contact, certain conditions, and all this is changeful. Our body is changing, our mind is changing, the world is changing. No condition, no contact can last eternally. Since our peace and happiness presently depend on all these, this can never be lasting. This can never be eternal. It's logical. We are basing or depending for this body and certain conditions of the world for our happiness. These themselves are shifting, these are changing continuously. So, whatever is based on changing conditions cannot be eternal. So, Upanishad says you move your source of happiness, your dependence of happiness, your dependence of peace from this changeful world, changeful body, mind, apparatus to God, which is eternal, which is changeless. So if you seek happiness in God, rather it would say you become one with God. God is changeless. So if we depend our happiness on changeful things, that happiness will be changeful. If we base our happiness on changeless entity, it will be changeless. It will be eternal. So Upanishads are meaningful. They respond to our aspirations in life in a much higher way. That's the point. So the upshot is you know God, know yourself, and you will have eternal peace and eternal happiness. The next question was, what is God then? You want to know God, what is God? And next two verses, we saw one verse in last class. It gives a very comprehensive description of Ishvara, of God or Bhagwan. It says, Eko vashi sarvabhutantaratma ekam rupam bahudayah karoti. It says God is Eka. Eka generally means one, but in this context it means it is the supreme. It is the acme of all blessed qualities. acme of prosperity, acme of beauty, whatever you call it, acme of Aishwarya, of success, of everything, of jnana, vairagya. It is the ocean of all qualities. Ashesha Kalyana Gunasagara. Anyway, so he is one, but the one means he is supreme. There is none equal to God or superior than God. And he is Vashi. Vashi means controller. He controls the living and the non-living. He controls the movements of the stars and suns, also the movements of humans, animals, living beings. Is Vashi, is controller. From where does he control? Is he sitting somewhere in some heaven, in some loka, and controlling from there? Which is no Sarva Bhutantaratma. He is the inner self of all beings and things. Of Jiva and Jagat, he is the Atma, the inner self, the essence of everything. When I say God is the inner self, we have to understand in what sense he is the inner self. God is not the self of all or inner self of all, like a seed in a fruit. When you cut open the fruit, you get the seed. So a seed is inside the fruit. God is not something inside this creation, inside the human beings, like being seed in a fruit. That's why it says, Ekam rupam bhaudayah karoti. This talk example, it's a very popular example of a rope appearing as a snake. In the twilight, when there is not sufficient light, but there is some light, a rope appears as a snake. Now, in that context, that rope is the self of the snake, because without rope, there cannot be perception of the snake. That rope is appearing as snake. So, rope is the self of the snake. So, also, this Bhagwan, this Ishvara, this Atma, Ekam Rupam Bahudayah Karoti. One, it is manifesting itself in innumerable forms. Thus, it is the self of all. Thus, it controls everything. And he is Eka, supreme. So that was the verse we saw in our last class. The same description continues. It says, Nityo Nityanam Chetanas Chetananam Eko Bahunam Yo Vidadhati Kaman. So this Ishvara, Bhagwan, God, is Anityanam Nityaha. Anitya means transitory, changeful. So amongst the changeful, of the changeful, this God is Nitya, changeless. See, this whole world, including our own body, mind, senses, external world, other human, changeful. A very apt example is given about this. In a cinema screen, cinema, when they see, there is one screen, and on that screen, various images and moving images, whole cinema is played out. That screen is changeless. And all those buildings and people and whatever, everything is changeful. So also, this world, this whole world that we see, including ourselves, whole thing is undergoing continuous change. But the substratum of all this, the Ishvara, the God, that is changeless. So that which is the changeless of this changeful world, that is God. Nityo Nityana. It says Chetanas Chetanana is the consciousness of the conscious. You see, we are all conscious beings. We are there, animals are there, then there may be higher beings like gods and pitrus or whatever you call them. We are Chetaitras, that is, we are conscious beings. But what is the source of our consciousness? This subject will come again in next verse, next 1 or 2 verses. What is the source of our consciousness? We never think of the source of our consciousness. So many accessories and instruments are there for knowledge to happen. But there's one ingredient which is consciousness. We take it for granted. But Upanishad is pointing out, in your fact of being conscious, there is a contribution of consciousness itself, which doesn't belong to any of the known instruments or accessories of knowledge. Consciousness doesn't belong to the eyes, it doesn't belong to the senses, it doesn't belong to the mind, it doesn't belong to the external physical light which is required for perception. It doesn't belong to the object that is being perceived. So, from object to the mind and buddhi, which identifies the object, none of these have consciousness as their inherent qualities. It doesn't belong to any of these. So, that which is the source of consciousness of all the conscious beings, which lends its jnana shakti, its power to know, to all conscious beings, that is self. That is the Ishvara. When we think of our process, our the fact of perception, fact of knowing, any knowing actually, not necessarily perception, even inference or any knowing, no instrument or accessory of knowledge that is known to us possesses consciousness. It's conscious by itself. The consciousness is lent to it by God. So Chetanas Chetanana. And lastly it says, Eko Bahunam Yo Vidadhati Kama. He is the Karma Phala Data, the giver of the results of actions. So human beings have desires. We perform actions or upasanas, pujas to get the results or to fulfill our desires. Kratu supte jagrat tvamasi phalayoge kratumata. The action ends. The karma ends. It's dead, gone. The result comes later. Now, who is it that is going to unite the doer, the karta, with the respective results? Innumerable people are performing various kinds of actions. Every action is producing some result. But that God, that Supreme Being, He ensures that the results, they are properly distributed. That is His mercy. Out of His mercy, He maintains this order that the results go appropriately. Results are distributed appropriately to the doers. And when we pray intensely to God, out of His own compassion also, He will give some results. So this karma phala data, that is another important function, so to say, of the Ishvara. So this is the description of God that Upanishad wants us to realize. It is Eka, Supreme, being the substratum of all manifestation. It has manifested itself in various forms. Thus, it is the self of all and controls all, controller. It is the one unchanging reality in this changing universe. It is the one conscious being, or it is the consciousness of all conscious beings. It is the one consciousness which lends itself to all conscious beings, and it ensures that the world order, the results of karmas are properly distributed. This is the Ishvara. And then Shruti says, now this is fine, but Shruti has to tell us the result of knowing this Ishvara. What will be the result of knowing such Ishvara? But first thing we have to find out what is meant by knowing. We have discussed this in earlier class. Mere existence of such a God, such entity, such truth is of no use to us. Mere intellectual knowledge is of no use to us. That's why Shruti says, Tam atmastham yena pashyanti dhiraha tesham shanti shashvati tesham sukham shashvatam. This Ishvara, this self, is to be realized as the essence, as the fact of our own being. Atmastham. As the fact of our existence, as our own real self, as our own reality. This Ishvara is to be realized. That is the way. Tesham sukham shashvatam, tesham shanti shashvatam. Such people who have realized God or the self, Atman, Brahman, whatever you call it, as the essence of their being, as the very fact of their existence, as their self, they alone get eternal happiness, eternal peace. This is the way to achieve eternal peace. Know God as your own real nature, as the fact of your existence, as the fact of our existence, and the fact of my existence. When one realizes God as the fact of one's existence, as the essence of one's existence, when one becomes one with God, that's what it's called, being one with God. Then only that Sukha and Shanti will be eternal. Now, this Sukha and Shanti, they come as properties of the mind. On account of certain conditions, we feel happiness, we feel peace, as properties of the mind, and then those go away. But if I become one with happiness, if I become one with peace, which is God, God is of the essence of happiness, of the essence of peace. If I become one with it, no one can take it away from me, because no one can separate me from my nature. So long as happiness is a property of my mind, it will go away. But if I become one with happiness, that is Shashvata Sukha, Shashvata Ananda, and Shashvata Shanti. So this is what the Upanishads promises. It is in line with human ends, human aspirations. And Upanishad has also given the means and all. And earlier also it has told, and now in these two verses it told the nature of the self, the nature of Ishvara, and the equation in which we have to realize Ishvara as our own self. And Shruti is not happy perhaps by just saying that Tesham Sukham Shashvatam, Tesham Shanti Shashvati, their happiness is eternal, their Sukha is eternal. So it adds Naitaresha, of none another. Only those who have realized God as their self have become one with God. Their happiness, their peace alone is eternal and of none else. So long as our happiness rests on this body and the world, it is shaky, it is impermanent. Only when we rest it on God, when we rest ourselves on God, then our happiness, our peace will be eternal. Next two mantras, they talk about this realization. This realization of God as one's own self, it's some kind of a fantasy. Something that only few can have. Others only have to believe. Is that the case? So Shruti says, Tadetat iti manyante anirdeshyam paramam sukham katham nu tad vijaniyam kimu bhati vibhati va. Shruti says, look, it is not that it is some fantasy. It is not that it's just a theory. It is not that only few have realized it and no one else will ever realize it. None like that. It uses two words, tad and etat. Tat means that. which denotes an object which is far away. And etat means this, which approximate object. So it says tad etat iti manyante. It says there are many. Manyante is plural. There are many who have realized that the self, the God, which for ignorant is far away. That. So, but there are many who have realized it as etat. Etat means this. So, that has been realized as this, as an object of direct and immediate perception. Very proximately by many. Tadetat iti manyante. How it is? Anirdeshyam paramam sukham. It is anirdeshya. It cannot be explained. That experience of self-realization, that cannot be explained. But innumerable are there who have realized it proximately, direct and immediate perception. Bhagavad Gita says, Bahavo jnana tapasa puta madbhavam agata. There are bahu, innumerable, who have purified themselves with this knowledge and austerity, and they have come to me. So there is the assurance Upanishad is giving us. Tadetat iti manyante anirdeshyam paramam sukham. No doubt that experience of God realization, it is anirdeshya. It cannot be described. Only thing you can say about it is paramam sukham. It is extreme bliss. Bliss of the highest order, that's all you can say. Otherwise it is anirdeshya. It is indescribable. Sri Ramakrishna, when he tries to explain about his experience, he cannot. Because it is anirdeshya. And that experience many have had directly and immediately. In a proximate way, the self, which appears very far to us, has been realized as an object of direct and immediate perception by many. That experience is indescribable. It is highest bliss. Then Upanishad wants us to think, it gives a direction to our thinking. Katham nu tat vijaniyam. How shall we know it? Upanishad wants us to think on these lines. How shall we know it? Katham nu tat vijaniyam. Kimu bhati vibhati va? Does it manifest itself? Does that God manifest itself? Can God be made an object of my intellect, of my antahkarana, of my buddhi, of my perception, of my experience in a specific way? This is what Upanishad is trying to push us towards thinking. Understand that many have realized it, and it is indescribable. But can I see it? Can I realize it? Can I experience God? How can I experience God? Katham nu tad vijaniyam. How can I experience God? Is it manifest? Kimu bhati? Vibhati va? Can I make it an object of my understanding? That is the question. So this is what the Upanishads are about. Not merely theory. The results are in sync with human ends. And they also want us to think, to aspire, to realize this God in our own life. The next mantra will give another hint towards this end as to whether God is manifest, how we can make it an object of our understanding, or how we can make it within the ambit of our understanding. We'll see in next class. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.